as we've just discussed, Sartre believes that the self is completely mutable, right? Um, but this does raise a particular puzzle, right? Uh, and that puzzle is, how do we count if the self is something that can change over time, right? What is it that we are? Is there an essential self, or are we just our personal identity? Right? So there are two different approaches to thinking about the self, right? That stem from this question, right? Of whether or not there's something essential to who we are, something that Sartre himself denies. Right? Um, the first approach is what is sometimes called the substance view of self, the idea that there is an essential self. So this is the self as substance, and this says that there is something to which all the properties, all the character traits that make me me belongs to, right? And that thing does not change. This allows for sameness across time. The other view is that yourself is just your personal identity, right? And so we just are this collection of properties themselves. And this is more along the lines of Sartre's view, right? The idea that there is no definitive self. You just are your personal identity, and you can be more or less honest with yourself about what that identity is, what those character traits are. Uh, in the case of the former, right, in the case of the substance view of the self, uh, personal identity is something that is separate, right? And this has been a consistent puzzle for philosophy for many, many years, right? For many, many years, there were the general view was that uh, there is something immutable that is the self, whether that's the soul, the body, something that does not change. And the personal identity gets built off of that. We're not going to focus too much on this particular view, the self as substance. Instead, we're going to focus most of our attention on the self as personal identity. However, I will give you two different examples of the self as substance. The first one we get from our good friend Kant. Right? So the substantial self, according to Kant, is defined by what he calls the transcendental ego. Right? And the transcendental ego, you might think of as a thread that binds together all experiences. It's transcendental because it is um, at once involved with and yet removed from the situations the moment-to-moment situations that define our experiential self, right? The self who feels um, or has experiences, right? There must be something that those experiences belong to, is Kant's thought. Right? Good way of thinking about it is as a thread weaving through each individual experience and connecting them all those experiences to the same one, right? So, for example, this mala here, it's made up of 108 individual beads and a thread. Right? The thing that ties the individual beads together is the thread. Right? Without the thread, there is no mala. Right? Same way, according to Kant, without the individual, or without the substantial self, the experiential self would be disjointed. Right? There would be nothing that holds together the various parts, the various experiences, and binds them together. Um, so, but that, and just like the thread that's part of this, right? It's not what you see. It's what ties. It's not something you see, but it is there and it ties everything together. Right? And that's the idea of the transcendental ego. The other view of the self um, as a substantial self we get from Martin Heidegger.